There are some works of art ingrained so deeply in our culture that we simply accept them as great, without ever questioning, are they actually? And if so, what is it that makes them great? Take the Mona Lisa, for example. You've probably seen her face so many times by now that you don't even stop to think about the fact that some dude had to spend hours upon hours painstakingly creating that face with his paintbrush. Did he do a good job? Well, I mean, he had to, since it's so popular. But is the Mona Lisa really popular because it is one of the greatest paintings of all time? Or is it maybe because sometime in the past people considered her expression so fucking goofy that they started displaying it as a joke, and over centuries we just lost the context of that joke, so now we think it's great because it was always popular? Honestly, I don't know. I've never stopped to consider the Mona Lisa either. But what I did consider was crime. But particularly one guy doing crime and being very debonair about it. Smooth Criminal was one of the most popular songs of all time, and I've heard it probably 3,000 times by the time I was an adult. It was just everywhere on the radio ever since I was a little baby. And one day while listening to it, I realized this song is kind of annoying, innit? And then I started wondering, is this song so popular because it's great? Or is it considered great because of how popular it became? And I actually deliberated on that and listened to the song many, many times, and I won't bore you with my entire thought process, but I came to the conclusion that, yeah, it is a really good song in the end with a fantastic bass line, but there are many songs, some even by Michael Jackson himself, that are less popular, which I find much, much better than that one. And when it comes to gaming, one of those like untouchable icons when it comes to games that just have cemented their status as one of the greatest of all time is definitely the first Super Mario Brothers game. Now, Mario is a complete cultural icon. Everybody in the world has at least heard of him. This Italian plumber in his blue-red overalls with his mustache is such a recognizable character. Well, not only because he starred in like 300 million games at this point, going to space, to the beach, becoming a go-kart racer or a professional tennis player for some reason. This guy even had 2 movies made about him. Now, admittedly, one of those movies was terrible, but thankfully the other one did not have Chris Pratt in it.
What is this place?
Mario is considered a hero, not only in universe, but also in real life, because he is credited with almost single-handedly saving the entire gaming industry. See, in 1983, the arcades as well as the popular home console Atari 2600 were so flooded with terrible games that people just stopped giving a fuck about gaming in general and just moved on. So when 2 years later, in 1985, Nintendo decided to enter the American console market, everybody just thought they were delusional and doomed to fail. But Nintendo made 2 genius decisions that helped them turn the tides of the entire gaming market. First of all, they decided to market their console as an entertainment system and not strictly a video game console, which proved effective with American shoppers for some reason. But secondly, and more importantly in this case, they decided that they will bundle a game with the console that will be so good to single-handedly make people care about gaming again. And that game was, of course, the first Super Mario Brothers. And well, they succeeded tremendously. Super Mario Brothers remained the best-selling game of all time for over 2 decades. only to be beaten out by Nintendo themselves with their Wii Fit 21 years later. And Nintendo only lost the throne of having made the best-selling game in 2011 when Minecraft released. Do you know, that's 26 years at the top for this same company built on top of this one game. That's insane. So by this point, it is clear that Mario has cemented its place in history and the game truly deserves it. But is it actually good? Like, if you were to play it now, almost 40 years after it came out, will you have a good time? That's what I decided to find out for myself. So in 2023, for the first time in my entire life, I completed the original Super Mario Bros. And I'm going to answer the question you're probably wondering about. Should you do it too? Or is it just a piece of gaming history better left in a museum? So just a bit of a background here to clear out all of my biases. Of course, I have played Mario before, like everybody else in this galaxy, right? I have the first level completely memorized by now. But as a kid, I was actually much more of a Sonic fan. I got my Sega Mega Drive when I was 3 years old, and I've got Sonic 1 and Sonic 3 with it. So those were the games I spent my entire childhood playing, right? And when I played Mario, it was either at my cousin's house in Germany. I only ever played it on my own hardware for the first time when I started emulating it on my computer in like 2011. So needless to say, yes, I did play this game, and yes, I did dabble with it, and I always considered it fun, but I never completed it, right? So I was curious if I actually put myself to the task, because I know that this game can be notoriously difficult. Will I still enjoy it, or will I find that it's like just too much of a hassle, right? Because a lot of those older games are just so mind-bogglingly hard that going back to them after all those years, you just don't have the patience. And just a disclaimer, I will discuss the different versions of this game by the end of the video, but just to discuss the availability, if you want to play this game, there are a ton of possible options, right? And there is the original NES release, and there is the SNES remake of this game as part of the Super Mario All-Stars collection. There is also another remake known as Super Mario Bros. Deluxe for the Game Boy Color, and there has been a port of the original NES version to the Game Boy Advance, known as the classic NES series Super Mario Bros. That's a lot, but to narrow it down for you, since I don't believe you're going to want to track down the original hardware, if you have a Nintendo Switch with a Switch Online subscription, you can without a problem play not only the original release, but also the SNES remake right here on your Switch. But what I would actually recommend is playing it on an emulator. And something like this. This is the Anbernic RG35XX. Horrible name, but what this device can do is emulate not only the NES, SNES, Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, but also the Sega Mega Drive and even the PlayStation 1. And that's actually how I completed Super Mario Bros. On my Anbernic using an emulator. And I'll touch on why I did it that way later, but keep that point in mind. Now, I'm gonna be honest with you, this might just be the hardest review I've ever done, just because it's so hard to separate the Mario game from the influence it had on the industry, right? And I want to talk about how much this game influenced other games in the future, but that's not what we're here for today. We're here to see if this game is good, not if the influence it had on the gaming market was good, because that was undeniably good, right? So let's start with the basics. The story in Mario is almost non-existent. You are a plumber, and a princess has been kidnapped by a dinosaur, and you must travel through 8 worlds to rescue the princess from the dinosaur. That's the story. Nobody gives a shit. The gameplay in Mario Bros. Is just as simple as the story. You run from left to right, and you can jump, you can run faster, and if you collect a specific power-up, you can also throw fireballs. That's it. Just run forward, land on the correct platforms, avoid enemies. That's it. That's all you need to do to complete the game. It's simple. But where a simple game really thrives is in how it executes those mechanics, right? Because if you have a really complex game with a lot of stuff to do, you can forgive some of the mechanics being half-baked, because, you know, there's just so many other ones to play with. But in a game which literally only uses 2 buttons on the controller, well, you expect those mechanics to be done to perfection. And before we evaluate each and every one of them separately, let's touch on the graphics quickly. Now, the graphics of Mario are one of those things where you never think about it just because of how used you are to it, right? You've seen this game so many times that you don't evaluate in your head. Does it look good? Does it look bad? No, it's just Mario. You've seen this game 300 million times, right? So you've never really stopped to consider, at least if you're in any way like me or the majority of people I've talked to about this subject, right? You'd never stop to consider, are those graphics good? Because, okay, obviously they're not, right? Well, they do have their charm and they are iconic, but when those programmers sat down at their computers to create those sprites, did they do a good job? Or did we just get used to it through exposure over the years and then concluded that it must have been a great job since it's got so popular? Eh? Well, I concluded that they did do a fantastic job. Now, of course, the NES was a very limited piece of hardware, right? For the time, of course, it was groundbreaking. But by modern standards, yeah, this console was not very strong, right? So you needed to make the graphics very, very simple. And some games did attempt graphics on the NES that were miles more complicated than Mario's, but those games usually look like a mess by modern standards. In contrast, Mario uses very, very simple graphics that are just done very cleanly and with a lot of personality. Take his character sprite, for example. He only has a few different frames of animation in the game, but the jumping animation is so iconic, and it is for a reason, because there is so much movement in this animation, even though it's only 1 frame. It's kind of insane, really. And yeah, like, it's hard to talk about the graphics of a game this old, but I find that the developers did a great job of delineating all of the different elements of the Mario's world and making them seem distinct. I find that the designers here did a really fantastic job creating graphics that are simple but recognizable and very functional. Just to give you an example, when you start the game, you're still the small Mario, right? And if you try jumping up below a block, if it's a brick, it will just bounce up and back down, right? But you see those question blocks, right? And I don't know about you, but even when I was a kid and I first played the game, my first instinct was immediately like, let's see what this block does, right? Now, my first instinct as a kid was just to jump down at the block from above, and well, nothing happened. But you know, it didn't take me a long time at all to figure out that, maybe if I jump from below the block, something different will happen. And lo and behold, yeah, I got my coin from my first ever question block. And then of course I got a mushroom. And I was like, oh, is this mushroom harmful? But I collected it by accident and I grew bigger. And I was like, okay, so now I know that I need to explore this world and see if I can find any more of those secrets. And when you see an enemy that looks like a turtle, it's not surprising at all that when you jump on it, instead of immediately dying like the earlier mushroom enemies, this guy just hides into his shell. And I remember when I first learned as a kid that you can kick the shell and make it like, and make it slide across the screen to knock out different enemies, that was so cool. So yeah, while those graphics are simple, I find that they are good enough at communicating the purpose of each element of the game's world. So yeah, they have definitely aged, and again, we'll touch on it by the end of the video, but the SNES port has much improved graphics if you care about that. But for what they were, I find that the Super Mario Bros. Graphics got iconic for a reason. They are very bright, very colorful, and very clear, let's just say. You can debate the graphics part with me. Some of you might just argue that, no, it's just ugly. And, you know, without taking into consideration the landscape of 1985, yeah, I can see that. I don't agree, but I can see that. But one thing which is undeniably fantastic in this game is the sound. There are just a few tracks, but goddamn, the music in this game is iconic for a reason. It is very lively, and when the composer Koji Kondo was working on this game's music, his goal wasn't to make music that suits the different environments that this game takes place in. His goal was to encapsulate the feeling of playing that game in the music, right? And that's why the music you find in your normal level is so whimsical. The music you'll find in the underground level has some more bases, more grounded and more like scary, you know? It's more dangerous. The music you get when you pick up the star is just pure joy, because you know you can run freely throughout the game's world. And the same applies when you get to one of the coin heavens, because you're not in any danger right there. You can just run freely and have fun. I love the music in this game. It is so fantastic, in fact, that Nintendo still uses variations of the same theme all those years later in new Mario games. This proves to me that the music here isn't just iconic because it's popular and because everybody's heard it so many times. No, it got popular because it is truly great. And the sound effects here are absolutely spectacular. Now, good or bad sound effects can make or break a game. And there is no better example of that than the comparison between New Super Mario Bros. U and Super Mario Bros. Wonder. Two games which have the exact same jump physics, but people complained about jumps in the older game feeling bad. They praised the jumps in Wonder for feeling amazing. But the only real difference between them is, first of all, the animation, which Wonder also copied from the first game, and the sound effects. So this proves how important sound effects are to the feel of the game, and the first Mario nailed those. There's so much satisfaction in those sound effects you get when you pick up a coin or when you pick up a star. Those sound effects are fantastic here. Now, let's touch on some particular mechanics, right? Because as I said, in a game with a ton of different complicated mechanics, some of them can be half-baked and the game can get away with it on the strength of the number of things to do. But in a game that has so few mechanics, for this game to be good, they have to be done to perfection. And let's touch on some specific mechanics in Mario 1. So when it comes to a platforming game, one mechanic that it absolutely needs to nail to be considered a good game, let alone a great one, is the movement. And I'm glad to report that the movement in Super Mario Bros. 1 is just perfect. And there is a very good reason why there's so many people speedrunning this game, because this movement, while yes, it might seem kind of clunky and stiff at the start, the more you learn about how to use it, it's actually incredibly precise. And this is something that I felt very directly as I started getting better and better at this game. At the start, I had to think a lot about how to land every jump, but as I got better at the game, it was incredibly easy for me to land even very hard jumps very quickly without any kind of stopping to assess the situation, just by feel, because those controls are incredibly consistent. Mario will always move at the same speed if you're just holding the D-pad left or right, but he will speed up if you hold the sprint button. To reach his full speed, he does need a few frames of run-up. When it comes to the jumping, the jump is actually an analog activity in this game, which is something very interesting, because I don't think any game before Mario did it, and few after tried to adopt this mechanic, but it's fantastic. So what happens is, if you just lightly tap the jump button, you will jump just a little bit. But if you hold the button longer, you will jump higher, right? And it's fantastic because it gives you so much control over your vertical movement that as you get better at the game, you really feel like you're able to reach even very hard to land jumps perfectly. So the movement system here is incredibly crisp. It allows for very, very high skill ceiling, and of course it's still very approachable for beginners because the controls are incredibly simple, right? And another part that a good platformer absolutely needs to nail is the level design. And here, once again, Shigeru Miyamoto and his team have done a banging job, and there is a reason why Mario levels are so iconic, and the reason is simply that they are perfectly designed to it's just everything is in one plane. You move left to right? But there's still plenty of secrets to find in every single level. Every level in this game can be completed in two ways. You can be very deliberate with your movement, you can be slow, and then you'll probably make it through the level. There aren't many jumps that can't be landed if you're just taking it slow and if you're planning your movements, right? But each level can also be just absolutely sprinted through. There are many places in this game where if you hesitate even for a second, some trap will activate and you'll need to wait for it to pass so that you can go further, right? But if you just sprint it through the level, you will probably make it in time before that trap actually hurts you, which is just perfect game design here. It rewards players who've put in the time to master the game's mechanics and who have the confidence to not stop when they encounter an obstacle. This makes Mario so insanely replayable, because at the start, when you first see each level, you'll probably want to take it slow. Not even because you don't know the level design and you don't know the dangers, which of course is the main part, but also because you might want to look for the secrets, right? Because the secrets in this game have some consistent logic to them. There are certain pipes where you can just feel that if you press down on them, you'll go to a bonus area. There are some blocks where you just can feel that there might be a vine leading to a star heaven if you just jump on below that block, right? It's literally game design perfection. While the levels in Super Mario Bros. 1 don't have the same kind of consistency between them as they do in the successor to this game, there is still some kind of a pattern. The first level in each world usually is pretty easy and introduces some kind of a new mechanic. Then the second level uses the same mechanic, but it gets a little bit harder, but there is usually some kind of twist in the second one. Third level is usually one where there's a lot of gaps that you can fall into and instantly lose your life. And the fourth level is always a castle, which is a maze of obstacles that, once again, I love castles in this game because most of them can be either taken really slowly and deliberately, and then you'll probably have no real danger, or they can be absolutely sprinted through if you have the skill to do it. I adore this pattern, except when it's interrupted by a water level. So some levels in this game, for example, World 2-2, are water levels, right? And those are just, ugh, I hate them. I hate water levels in this game. Why? Because they completely change how your character controls. Because you're no longer running left or right, you're swimming, right? And Mario's swimming is so incredibly clunky. You need to press the jump button to swim up, and if you don't keep pressing this button, you'll start falling down slower and slower, right? And you have very little control over your character in the water levels, and there is a ton of enemies. Usually it's just fish who are just swimming around and they are just simply annoying. But there's also those octopuses which will just fucking chase you, and they're so incredibly frustrating. Now, the approach by the game's designers here was to create levels which play slower so that the player can rest in between the frantic pace of main levels. But the thing is, this approach fucking sucks. This can only work if those water levels were easier than the main levels, but the thing is, they still offer enough challenge, and the controls are so clunky where you just feel like they are a waste of your time. If you're trying to go through the game fast, then the water levels will be an incredible annoyance, just slowing you the fuck down and breaking the pace of the game. And if you're trying to take it slow, well, you still sometimes need to take it fast in water levels, because those enemies just will fuck you up if you hesitate. I hate them. I understand why they are in this game. They do add some variety, but I hate how they control. So that is my only gripe with level design. The water levels just shouldn't exist at all. I already mentioned enemies when talking about the water levels. Let's talk about the different enemies that you can encounter throughout the game. In the first level, you'll encounter the Goomba, which is just a mushroom-shaped guy, and you can just step on him and he dies, and it's the simplest enemy in the game. But you'll also encounter the turtles, and the turtles are incredibly fun, but also incredibly dangerous if you are not careful. So what happens when you jump on a turtle? Instead of killing him, the turtle will just drop his shell, and you can kick the shell to launch it forward, right? The problem is it will kill all the enemies in its path, so that's great, but it will also bounce off walls, right? So you have to be very careful for it not to bounce back into you. And turtles in enclosed spaces where you've only got like 3 or 4 blocks between walls can be incredibly dangerous. These are the basic enemies, which are just simply fun to play around. There's also the flying turtle, which moves more erratically, and it's pretty hard to get used to at the start. Kind of like armored turtles. I don't actually know the name of all the enemies in Mario, just sue me for that, but I don't care. And those guys behave pretty much exactly the same as normal turtles, but they can't be defeated with fireballs, which makes them infinitely more annoying to deal with. As you get later in the game, you'll start facing some enemies that can make your blood boil. There is this guy, which I call the camera guy. I don't know why, but when I was a kid, I was convinced this guy has a camera, which doesn't look like he has, but I'm still gonna call him the camera guy. And the camera guy will drop those like spiky monsters that you can't kill at all unless you have a fireball with you. So levels where those guys appear basically turn into a frantic run, because if you stop even for a second, you'll be swamped by those spiky creatures. If you don't have a flower, that is. I always dislike those enemies, but I think they are appropriately challenging. Ones which I absolutely do not think are appropriately challenged, and I think they were designed by Satan himself and don't belong in this game at all, are the Hammer Brothers. Those cunts will throw hammers at you, and their movement pattern is so unpredictable that when they come onto the screen, unless you have a fire flower, you pretty much have to stop and pray that you can fucking dodge those hammers, because those cunts are pretty much impossible to kill. The break in between them throwing hammers is so short that you can pretty much never capitalize on it by jumping on them, right? So when you find one in an open field, good fucking luck. You basically need to just hope that you can dodge his hammer, which you most likely can't. And the only chance to ever fight back is if you find them near vertical platforms, then you can kill them by jumping below them. And those cunts are the worst fucking thing in this game. I hate the Hammer Brothers. Whoever implemented them needs to go to hell. Now, I do think they offer an appropriate challenge, but I still hate them. Okay? I don't consider them a game's weakness, but I still hate them nonetheless. And then there are a few more enemies which are not notable enough for me to mention, but at the end of every world, at the end of every castle, you'll meet Bowser. Now, Bowser is this giant dinosaur who kidnapped the princess, right? And there are two ways to defeat Bowser, at least in most encounters, right? So the most obvious one, there is an axe on the other side of the bridge, and if you jump on that axe, it cuts the bridge that Bowser is standing on, and he falls down into lava, right? One thing I did not know until somebody online told me is that the first 7 Bowsers are actually fake, and you can kill them using fireballs. And that just blew my mind, because I've played this game so much as a kid, and I never knew that. So now you do. But yeah, Bowser fights are challenging later in the game, because earlier on, you always have like a moving platform that you can jump on to avoid him, but later on, either that gets taken out, or additional walls get added when you face Bowser, or he starts throwing hammers in addition to his normal fireballs, and you have to run below him. So yeah, later Bowser fights are really challenging. Well, they're not really fights, he's more of an obstacle than an enemy, but I do like the boss encounters in this game. I think this is an unpopular opinion. Most people just say they're too easy or too simple. And while I agree that they're simple, I definitely don't find them too easy. Might say more about my skill level, but I do not. And the second to last mechanic that I will touch on before I finish this video are the power-ups. Now, there are very few of them in this first installment of the game, but they are iconic, so let's talk about them. First of all, there's the mushrooms, right? You eat them, you get bigger, which, yeah, I sometimes do feel like I'm very huge when I eat mushrooms, but, you know, different kinds. But yeah, this only means that Mario is bigger, so of course he is easier to hit by enemies, but also that he can take a hit, right? Because if you take a hit as Big Mario, you transform back into Small Mario. If you've already collected one mushroom, then the other mushrooms in the game are replaced by fire flowers, and collecting those grants you the ability to use fireballs. Now those are absolutely broken. They make the game so much easier, but of course there's the other danger. First of all, you still have the bigger hitbox of the Big Mario, right? And if you get hit as Fire Mario, well, you go all the way back to being Small Mario. There is no incremental downgrade. All of the firepower taken away from you. Pun absolutely intended. And the last power up you'll find in this game is the star. The star allows you to just run through all the enemies, and anything that touches you instantly dies. But the power-ups aren't the only thing that you will collect in this game. There's also coins, right? And coins by themselves, they don't do anything except adding to your high score, which I never cared about. But if you collect 100 of them, they will give you an extra life. And the last thing you can find in the world, and usually pretty well hidden, are green mushrooms that will also grant you an extra life. Which leads me smoothly into my last mechanic of the game. And while talking about it, let's just quickly touch on the game's different ports, right? Because I think this is Super Mario Bros. Biggest flaw, but it has aged pretty well. And let me explain what I mean. So the game has a life system, right? In the original NES release, you only get 3 lives at the start, plus, as I mentioned, you get 1 more whenever you collect 100 coins, and you can sometimes find them scattered randomly in secret areas of the levels, right? But the thing is, that's really not enough. Whenever you die, you will lose 1 life, right? But the problem is, if you lose all of your lives, well, then you need to start the game from the beginning, which I find incredibly frustrating. No matter how far you get through the game, you still need to play through all of the earlier levels again to just reach the point that gave you all the trouble, right? And that's kind of frustrating because you can legitimately get stuck in a really difficult place in like World 6, right? But to get there, you still need to complete the first 5 worlds. Even if you don't have a problem with that, that just takes so much time, and I fucking hate that mechanic. Like, one thing that I appreciate about modern game design in platformers like Celeste, for example, is when you die, you immediately get to retry in pretty much the same spot as you died in. So even if some jumps are really, really hard to land, you can easily practice them and get better at them to overcome that challenge, right? And in Mario, it is incredibly hard to practice that because, well, when you die 3 times in the same spot, it's back to the beginning of the game. And this is incredibly frustrating. And if I were rating the game based on how it worked on the original hardware, I would not be able to give it more than a 7 because this system, while yes, you can say that it adds to the difficulty and, you know, just get good, I just think it's more frustrating than it is challenging. And thankfully, Nintendo agrees with me, because in the later installments of the game, they tried to fix it. In the SNES port, which you can actually see the footage of playing in the background, there are 2 important changes. First of all, you get 5 lives at the start instead of just 3, which gives you a little bit more of a breathing room to learn the game's mechanics. But also, this game introduces the continue mechanic. So if you lose all of your lives, you can continue the game instead of starting from the beginning. And what that does is, instead of starting you all the way back in world 1-1, it will start you at the beginning of the world in which you died, right? So for example, if you die in level 5-3, it will start you back in 5-1, not 1-1. So you don't have to recomplete the entire first half of the game to even get to the part which gives you trouble. I love that, right? And yes, the original game also has that, but you need to use a code where you hold A after you die, and just, I'm not counting that. So the SNES version does improve the accessibility, but it's still not enough. Then there is the Game Boy Color remake, Super Mario Bros. Deluxe. And this game adds a save system, which is a godsend, right? And this is the best stock experience when it comes to lives in this game, because not only do you get 5, just as you do in the SNES version, after you die, you can just load the previous save and you immediately get 5 lives back, and you can start right at the same level in which you die, right? So now, if you died in 5-3, you start in 5-3 again. So simple. That's how it should have worked from the beginning. Now, I understand, due to console limitations, they couldn't really implement that on the NES at the time, but it is a huge improvement in the Game Boy Color port. But let's touch on the port itself for now. So the original NES one, that's the one I've been talking about the entire time, and everything I said so far applies to it, and you get the original NES graphics, right? So yeah, I think this is like the most iconic version of the game, but it's not necessarily the best one, because on the SNES, it was remade as part of the Super Mario All-Stars collection, and this version of the game not only upgrades the graphics in a massive way. There are, if you can argue about the graphics on the NES, well, the graphics on the SNES are just objectively beautiful. There are some of the best sprite work that has ever been done in a 2D game, and you can fight me on that because they are simply beautiful, right? And on top of that, this game is easier because it gives you 5 lives, and it also has the continuous system. So it's just the best way to play the game, right? Well, kinda. Because there is one thing that this game does which I don't quite agree with, and that's it changes the physics. First of all, it really feels like Mario is a little bit more slippery, and it feels as if he accelerates faster, which, if you've never played the original, this might actually make the game easier, but if you already have muscle memory from the original, it just makes the game feel really weird. And actually, the first time that I started playing the SNES version, as you can see on your screen now, I would just fail like the easiest jumps possible because I had problems with the newer physics. I do consider this to be a better version of the game, but it's also not the intended experience, right? So then you get the Game Boy Color port, Super Mario Bros. Deluxe, and this version is fantastic because it does have the same physics as the original game. It does have the save system, but it still has one very important problem, and that is the screen crunch. See, the Game Boy Color had a small screen of limited resolution, so the developers had two choices. Either they downgrade the graphics massively, or they can keep the original graphics but crop the screen, right? And they went with the latter, which I do think it was the correct choice because this game looks very impressive for Game Boy Color standards. But what it results in is a lot of added danger. And I genuinely couldn't finish the first world in this version of the game when I started playing it for the first time. Because even though I know those levels by heart, not being able to see where you're jumping is a bit of a deal breaker. Now, this game still sold really well, and it got really good reviews when it came out, but I do think that it's not the ideal way to play the game, even though it could be the easiest in theory thanks to how it handles lives, right? And the last version of the game that was released officially by Nintendo was Super Mario Bros. In the NES Classic series on the Game Boy Advance. And this is simply a port of the NES game, and the only change is a downgrade in graphics. So yeah, if you want to play the game in a widescreen environment but looking really weird, that's for you, but otherwise I would just ignore this port. So if you're planning to complete this game like I did, I would advise you to choose between the NES original and the SNES port, right? And this will come down to two things. Do you prefer the upgraded graphics of the SNES port, in which case just play that version? Or do you want to play the game as it originally was? In that case, of course, go with the NES version, because that's the intended experience, right? The physics, this is what made the game so famous, and this is why all the speedrunners stick with this version instead of the SNES version, because those physics are just perfect, right? And the SNES version changes them, in my opinion, for the worse. But I mentioned that the life system is my biggest problem with the game. So why do I still advise you to play the version which has a worse approach to that? Well, thanks to modern conveniences of emulators, lives are not a problem anymore. And here's why. You have this function called save states in pretty much every emulator. Whether you play on the Switch, or on an Unbonic, or on PC, you can just do a save state at the start of every level, and then as soon as you die, you just load that save state and you start at the beginning of that same level. And that's perfect in my opinion, because you can completely ignore lives and play Super Mario Brothers like you would a modern platformer like Celeste, right? So when you die, you get transported right back to the start of the level. There is no life system to worry about, and this makes the game so much better. And I'm not gonna lie here, I would probably never have completed it without save states, because the thing is, it's just so fucking annoying to have to backtrack every time you die, and it's so hard to practice those late game levels, because sometimes I died like 20 times in like 8.2 when trying to practice the level, right? And that would mean I would have to restart the game like fucking hundreds of times before I can beat this one level. And that's just too much of a time investment for me, right? Because yeah, maybe back in 1983 you would play this game, and since it's the only game you have for your NES, that's what you play all day, and that's you play 2 hours here, 2 hours there, and eventually you get good enough at the game to beat it. But most people who played the game back then did not beat it for this very reason, right? So I feel like using the save state system is the better experience. And Nintendo agrees, because they have included this function in their own emulator on the Switch, right? So yeah, I think the save state function just saves this game, pun intended, because now, instead of an incredibly frustrating experience that you would need to dedicate months to even get good enough at to finally beat it, well, you can do it in the span of a couple of weeks instead. And I think that this is just a much better proposition. And the skill you acquire by playing the game this way is not in any way lesser than the skill you would acquire when backtracking throughout all of the game, because those harder jumps at the end of the game, well, those are the real challenge, right? So if you get good at them, then you can easily go back and play the game from the beginning to end without much problem, right? For example, like I had incredible problems beating World 8 of this game, but now that I've done it, thanks to the save states, I can actually run the game from start to finish. And in general, I consider Super Mario Brothers one of those games that gets better the more time you put into it, right? So I would advise you this: complete this game at least once using save states, and if you enjoy this experience, then you can try running it without it. I can almost guarantee you, any modern gamer who approaches this game and tries to just go raw, go the original intended experience, you'll eventually get frustrated and bounce off. And I do think this game is excellent, and I do think some of those later levels are fantastic challenges that test your skill a lot, and you get so much satisfaction from beating them, right? And I don't want you to miss out on this, because this really is some of the greatest fun you can have in gaming. And the thing is, yes, Super Mario Brothers is hard. It is a difficult game, but once you master the controls, it is so incredibly satisfying. Even though I grew up as a Sonic the Hedgehog fan, I think that Mario might still be the most satisfying platformer to speedrun, just because of how great you feel knowing how much you struggled with those levels, and now you just simply breeze through them with confidence. For that very reason, I do still consider Super Mario Bros. One of the greatest games of all time and definitely worth a playthrough. So in the end, I will award it a score. It's pretty high thanks to the convenience of emulators, because I'm gonna be honest with you, if I didn't have this convenience, I would have never finished the game, right? And I would probably just given it a 7 or something. But thanks to modern technology, you are able to enjoy the game way more than you would when it first came out. So in that case, I just think this game aged like fine wine, because the mechanics are basic, yes, but they are executed so perfectly that once you get a hang of them, you'll find incredible joy in just running through this game. And even though I've beat it a good few months ago for the first time, I still find incredible joy in sometimes when I'm bored, just pulling out my handheld console and just running through the game and seeing how far can I get on just 3 lives. And I recommend every single one of you to actually give completing Super Mario Bros. A real shot, because this game is still fantastic. And with all of those caveats, I'm going to award it a 9.6 out of 10. Now, this is a very high score, but this is a very good game. And yeah, there are some frustrations which prevent it from being perfect, right? Like, for example, water levels. No matter how good I got at the rest of the game, I still fucking hate those. And Hammer Brothers, no matter how good I got at the game, I still fucking hate them, right? But besides that, this game is pretty close to perfection. And it shows, because even almost 40 years later, there is still a dedicated community of gamers playing this game all year round on Twitch, right? So just take the plunge. It's so easy. The game is so accessible. You can run it on literally everything. $50 for this handheld, and it is literally the perfect Super Mario Bros. Experience. So go ahead, play the game. And next week, I'm gonna see what happens when you take platforming perfection and you try turning its main hero into an RPG protagonist. Does it sound shit? I think it sounds shit, but Nintendo and Square made Super Mario RPG, so let's see what they cooked up. See you next week.